Hey everyone, we are live and today we are discussing the Bootstrap grid system. And so this is a topic that a lot of people who are new to Bootstrap struggle with a little bit. Might seem a little complex and overwhelming, but hopefully we can kind of break that down into small chunks and help it not seem so complex. So hopefully this will demystify the grid system for you. We're also going to cover Bootstrap Cards, which we'll do one right after the other here. So in order to understand the Bootstrap grid system, we need to understand containers, because in order to use the grid system, we have to use containers. So rule number one of the grid system is it has to be in a container. Okay, so we need to understand containers. Couple bullets that I have here, and I'm actually going to contradict one of the bullets, and I'll explain that here. Containers are the most basic layout element in Bootstrap and are required when using a grid. And so we're going to find out very quickly when we used a wrapper in HTML and CSS. A wrapper is very similar to a container in that a wrapper is used to contain all of our content. In HTML, we learned a wrapper div would open after the opening body and close before the closing body. And so if we remember a wrapper, I'll just remind us of what a wrapper looked like in HTML. We'd have div ID of wrapper, and you'll remember this. And then inside of here, we would have all of our header, nav, main, aside, footer. Point being, everything went inside of the wrapper. And that's similar to a container. Everything goes inside of the container. Instead of wrapper div, we'll have a class of container small, these different classes that we can use. And you might remember with a wrapper, we would give it a width, maybe 80%, margin 0 on the top and bottom, auto on the left and right. And that's what our wrapper would do. Make the wrapper gray. Real quick, loop this up. So the wrapper is gray, so all the content's in the wrapper. All the content's in the wrapper. We're going to replace this with a container now. Containers are used to contain, pad, and center the content within them. Think one thing that's confusing to people is you say center the content. That's not text align center. Right? There's a difference between text align center and what these containers do. When I'm talking about centering the content, I'm just talking about taking the white space that was all on the right and balancing that out on both sides. And so if you look down the middle of your screen, that's where you're going to find all the content. The content is not left justified now. It's more justified more towards the center. So the white space is balanced. Maybe I would redescribe it as, instead of centering content, I would talk about balancing the white space. Containers provide simplicity and predictability of fixed layouts with a responsive twist. And here's a bullet that says containers should never be nested. So why is that bullet on there? Why should containers never be nested? The predictability of what a container does is fairly straightforward. I'm going to demonstrate all these containers. There's in Bootstrap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 containers. So these are 7 classes that we can use to make a container. And when you understand how these classes work, these are very predictable in how they respond. When you start nesting containers, keep in mind it's always the width is always based on the parent element. And so you start nesting containers, and what happens is I can't predict anymore what's going to happen. Okay, so the bullet here says containers should never be nested, and that's the reason. I would argue that the predictability of how these things respond is more complex. Okay, now if you actually look at Bootstrap Docs, okay, so here's getbootstrap.com. We go to the documentation. You're going to find containers under not content, excuse me, under layout. Layout containers. Okay, it says the same thing right here, right? Fundamental building block of Bootstrap. Containers are the most basic layout element and are required when using the grid system. Okay, we've seen that now twice. While containers can be nested, most layouts do not require nesting, right? So kind of rule of thumb, avoid it if you can avoid it, but it's not going to break. They can be nested, and it's not uncommon to find them nested. It just creates, it can create some positioning confusion when it comes to positioning. Okay, so let's actually demonstrate the class of container. How are we going to do this? Let's go home, get started. Let's start with our starter template. Throw this in here instead. Let's go ahead and do just like we did on this last one. I should have just copied and pasted header, nav, main, side, footer. Throw in some content, header, nav, main, side, footer. And let's throw in a div with the class, and let's look at our options. This is now our wrapper. By default, let's see what this does. Okay, again, everything is over here, basically hugging the left. The first class is just a class of container. So instead of div with an ID of wrapper, I'm going to do a div class of container. Now let's look at this. In extra small viewports, less than 567, we're going to get 100% width. But then small, you can see there's going to be some padding left over, 540 pixels. What does that mean? That means 36 pixels left over, distributed across the 2 sides. So half of 36 is 18. 18 pixels on both sides. Make sense? As you scale up, we hit 768, and that's exactly it at that dimension, right? As you scale up, it just keeps them evenly spaced out on both sides. As you scale up, you could see, you know, this was 36 pixels between the 2 sides. This is 48 pixels. And so the bigger screens have more white space on the sides, which just makes sense. So let's see now what, okay. Looks just like a wrapper, doesn't it? This is our wrapper. Now, if I inspect and I go down to my responsive here, this should go 100% width at 575. So here's our width, 755. And what was the number I said? 575. Okay, well there. We're at 561. So now let's inspect the body div class container. You notice now all we have there is a little bit of padding. Let's go back bigger. This has padding and margin. So that margin is what's disappearing at 575. Pretty straightforward, right? Containers aren't too bad. So container and container small, do they differ at all? Container SM looks exactly the same. Container medium says that anything smaller than medium has 100% or no margin. Container large says anything smaller than a large device has 100% width. So let's just throw on container large and see how it behaves differently. Container hyphen LG. So now container large, anything smaller than 992 pixels will have no margin. So our magic number is 992 in this case. So let's inspect. Let's click on responsive. So right now, if I inspect my container, we've got the margin. So as I scroll down, our magic number was 990 in there. Well, there you go. I'm at 980. And as you can see, our margin disappears. So don't let containers overwhelm you, confuse you. They're just wrappers. They're wrappers that have behaviors at predictable viewports. The other one that's pretty common that you'll see is container fluid. Container fluid is just 100% across all breakpoints. Container fluid basically means no margin on the sides at all. It should go 100% of the parent container. Keep in mind, this is of the parent container. 100% of the parent. So you will see the class of container fluid. Let's just demonstrate that one real quick. Container hyphen fluid. Go back here. Does not matter our width. We're saying 100%. Okay, beating the horse into the ground. Grid system, magic number. I mentioned this the other day. Magic number to remember is 12. And so each row, keep in mind, we do need a container. Inside the container, you're going to have rows. Inside the rows, you have columns. So containers have rows, rows have columns. The number of columns adds up to the magic number of 12. Therefore, if you say that your column represents all 12, then you're going to get a single column in that row. If you say that your column represents 6 of the spaces, you're going to get 2 columns, right? You have room for 2 columns. If you say that your column is taking up 4, you're going to have room for 3 columns. So inside of each row, you should add up to the magic number of 12. And there's a bunch of ways to do that, right? You could say there's 12. You could say 6 and 6. Of course, 4 and 4 and 4 would get you 3. If you say 3s, you get 4 of them. If you say 2s, you get 6. You get 6 columns. And you could go down and even say that each one takes up 1 space, which gets you 12 columns. So let's take an example real quick. Outermost container, div class of row. This class name is required. In order to have the grid system, you need rows and columns. So outermost container, then you have rows, and then you have a call of 4 and a call of 8. Keep in mind, when you don't specify a viewport, this is mobile first. So it's going to go to the extra, extra small, or just extra small, excuse me. This is extra small and up. So this column that's basically 1/3 and 2/3 in size, these two columns will be that way for all your devices. So let's just code that up real quick, and again, you can kind of see this. So inside here, div class of row, div with the class call -4, div with the class call -8, hit tab and get you that. 1/3, 2/3. This is inside of container fluid. Let's just put it inside of container. If we inspect, inside of our container, there's our row, 1/3, 2/3. For pretty much all the way. Now, if you get down, look, I mean, 100 pixels wide, the content's gonna eventually wrap. It is based on Flexbox, so it does have some built-in, but I can't think of something, a screen that's only 97 pixels wide, right? Even our cell phones, if we kind of look at it like a smaller iPhone, which I guess would just be like, I don't know, one of these old iPhones here, 320 pixels wide. So, point being, mobile first design, so if you don't specify a viewport, that's how it works. We did kind of show this yesterday where you could start saying, okay, well, in mobile, I want a column, and then you can single column, and then in tablet view, I want maybe 2 columns, and then in desktop view, I want, you know, like we did that example yesterday where you want a row instead of a column. And you do that by adding the different abbreviations for the different viewports. And so let's take a look at that. Again, keep in mind, the main thing to remember here is that this is mobile first. And so what happens, let's ask this. So what happens if our class is medium 4? Medium 4, medium 4. Well, 4, 4, and 4, that's 3 of them that add up to 12. So you're going to get 3 columns. So on medium and up, you're going to get a row with 3 columns. But then since we didn't specify anything smaller than medium, everything smaller than medium will default to a column, right?
So 12.
So 12. Yeah, everything smaller than what you specify will go into a column, or basically 12, 12 units per row, right?
Is there a reason for it being number 12?
Is there a reason for it being 12? There have been different grid systems that add up. I think that there is an answer, and I think that answer goes into like more design theory than I know. So I think there's a reason. I think that reason deals with, again, kind of like a graphic designer when they're designing layouts, and but I don't know is the answer for sure. But yeah, I think so. So let's do this example, and you'll, not that I need to code it all, but we got our div class container, call, so again, call, and then our device size, and then 4. So call medium 4, call medium 4, div with the class of call, how about this, div class call medium 4 times 3. Hey. So here, again, the default behavior is on medium and up. We get 3 columns per row. But as soon as we get anything smaller than medium, it's going to default back to a column instead of a row. So that's good to know. We didn't cover that yesterday. Okay, so let's take a look at here. We got a class of row, and in our class of row, medium 4, medium 4, medium 4, medium 4. Well, again, we add up to 12. So what do we have here? On our medium devices, we have 3 columns, but we have 2 rows of 3 columns. If you look here, because you're basically adding up well past 12, you're adding up to 24. So the default behavior there is going to be, okay, we're just going to have 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Basically, you don't need, in other words, you don't need a new class of row, technically, for every new row. They will do the math for you. But then once we get into extra large, well, we could say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So extra large devices is a single column. Anything smaller than 4, since we don't have it specified, as you know, we covered this on the last slide, defaults to 1 per column, or 12. So it goes into a column format. By default. All right, so let's basically, that's what you need to know about the grid system. Let's see if there's anything else here on the docs that's worth pointing out. So let's go to layout, containers. We covered containers. Let's go to grid. I mentioned this yesterday, but if you leave the number off, it'll do the math for you and get them all into a single row. So this doesn't say call for, but that's what it is. It's call for. They talk about the breakpoints that we've covered. We talked about containers. Each column has horizontal padding called a gutter for controlling the space between them. This padding is then counteracted on rows with negative margins to ensure that your columns are visually aligned on the left side. So there are these things called gutters, which if we look there's a little bit of padding there between our columns. You see the green? So that padding is there by default. Those are your gutters between the columns. And you can change the gutters. In other words, you can change the padding. Let's see. It's not something I have to do very often. So I'd have to find out the class. Let me look. Here's the gutter classes. That's what I need. I should have just clicked here. Rows are supported. Here's gutter classes to change the spacing of your content. So here's gutter classes. Gutters are referred to as the padding between your columns. Gutters start at 1.5 rems, which is 24 pixels wide. And here they just add what you'll see right in here. They add, here's gutter, GX5. So let's add this GX5 to our row. And those gutters are a little bit bigger now. So that can control that. And that is a pretty good overview of what you need to know for the grid. Let's just roll right into it. We're going to cover some Bootstrap cards. So we'll keep going and cover these slides. Let's go to the Get Bootstrap website and find cards. One thing that I've mentioned in here once, I'm going to mention it again. Under examples, there are a lot of good examples that I've come across in here that gives you like entire page layouts and examples of using a lot of these components together. Like let's just click on this, features. Like this is a page that's full of Bootstrap things, buttons, rows, columns, icons, cards, all these. And you could use this as a template for a page of yours, right? And then customize the content. And so you can come in here and download source code and pick, like here's a nice cover page, right? I could see a nice background image. You plop in a background image on here, right? But these are designs that I guess you see kind of commonly across the internet. So just worth mentioning, yesterday we kind of looked at these jumbotrons. They give some navbar examples. Navbar at the bottom. So just a page that's worth referencing. But that's not here nor there dealing with cards. So let's go back to the docs. There's a lot that can be found under components. And so, you know, we think about what we've covered so far in Bootstrap. We've covered, you know, first off, you know, starter template, what is Bootstrap, where does it come from, how is it used, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of what are called components. And these are just pre-built things that you can put into your Bootstrap sites. And so they make it easy with these UI, user interface, these UI components for you to plop them into your site and customize them for your needs. A card is a pretty generic container for like an image, some text, and maybe a link, right? So if we really look at what this card is, it's just a box where you could put an image, a title, a heading, maybe a paragraph, and an action link, if you will. And you can style these in all sorts of ways. Let's read briefly. Bootstrap cards provide a flexible and extensible content container So it is a container with multiple variants of options. A card is a flexible, extensible container. It includes options for headers, footers, and a wide variety of content, contextual background colors, powerful display options. If you're familiar with Bootstrap 3, cards replace our old panels, wells, and thumbnails. Similar functionality to those components are available as modifier classes for cards. So here's an example. Cards are built with as little markup and styles as possible. So now that we've covered kind of like the big over sweeping, like how to use Bootstrap in the grid, now let's talk about what you can put into the grid. And one of those things is a card, and there's all these other components that we can cover. But still manage to deliver a ton of control and customization built with Flexbox. They offer easy alignment and mix well with other Bootstrap components. They have no margin by default, so you can use margin and padding as needed. Here's a basic card with mixed content and a fixed width. Cards have no fixed width to start, so they fit naturally, fill the full width of the parent element. This is easily customized. So I'm going to take this card, and again, this is just right off of a component, and I'm going to plop it in one card into each one of our columns. And then I'm going to format this with Beautify. Okay, so that's a little bit easier to see. So we've got our container, we've got our row with some custom gutters. Medium devices and up, there's going to be a single row with 3 columns. Small and extra small, we're going to go into a single column view. The outermost, so this is actually the card. When we're looking at what's important for the card, we're looking between these lines here. We've got an outer class of card. So the parent, if you will, the parent class is called card. We've got a child element called card body. Okay, and I suppose they talk about headers and footers and bodies of cards. So you can kind of imagine there's going to be a header, a footer, and a body. So in this particular card, all we have is a body. And there's an image, which in this case, the image is not filled out. But let's just take a look. We plop a card into this, and this is what we get. Of course, let's just go to Google and throw in an image of Rankin images, Rankin R. Let's visit the site. Let's see if I can get a URL of this. Oh, this is Facebook. So if I inspect, this particular image is an SVG. So I don't want to use that either. Fine, I'll save it locally. Let's do this real quick. I'm putting this in my labs, I believe, chapter 11. So let's go labs, chapter 11, JFIF, which is a JPEG, Rankin. Go up here. Wrong folder. Okay. As I need to find what folder I'm in. So let's somehow There it is, Bootstrap. It's in my Bootstrap folder.
See, I think you should go to right click and go to copy link address, and then that'll give you like the global URL.
That's a good idea. I forgot about that one. Right click, copy link address. Let's try that.
Always hide in there.
There we go. That way we don't have to save anything locally. Let's see if that works. Copy link address. It's a Google search, so I don't know that that's... Darn it. Okay, ranking. Cut. Copy. Back into my repo. Here. Bootstrap. There's Bootstrap. There's labs. There's images. Paste. Ranking. I saw Facebook in that URL, and I'm willing to bet that that's what caused that to break. Sometimes we have networking filters that block stuff that says Facebook. Okay. We know how to work with images, yay. So what, remember it did take up the entire column. So what you're seeing in between is that custom gutter that we have. If we just inspect this, right? So this card's taken up most of the space. The blue is the content. So even though the image and the text aren't going that way, it's taking up the space. So what could you put in a card? I'm going to talk about this slide here for a second. Cards are used to represent items in a list or an array. What do we talk about in a list or an array? Okay. Here's a good example. You go to Amazon.com, right? You search for, I'm going to buy a basketball, okay? What happens? That search, basketball, goes to Amazon's databases, okay? And it says, give me all the basketball products. Okay, so that's called a query. You know, give me all of the basketball products. The database then returns a list of products. And so in C#, for example, there's a list. There's a data type. There's a thing called a list, and the database is going to return a list of products. Okay, and so you can just imagine it's just a list of, and each product has a product image. It has a product description. It has a product price, right? So each product that's coming out of these Amazon databases, and then you could take that list of products and then display them in cards. That's kind of what, I mean, if you think about what it actually looks like on Amazon.com. You know, these are or could be cards. Each one of these products could be its own card, right? What modern website doesn't have a feature like this? Most modern websites, whether it's Spotify, Facebook, Amazon, Instagram, you know, you always have the ability to search. And then it returns a list of products, a list of friends, right? Search by people, a list of people, right? So cards are very commonly used to display results from a database. And most websites have that in them. So that's why cards are so useful, right? Oh, you go to Pinterest and you search for healthy recipes. right? And back comes all of these cards on Pinterest. Any Pinterest users in here? I'm not really, but right? Whatever. YouTube videos, right? Search for videos on YouTube. What do you got? A bunch of cards in return. Search for restaurants on Yelp. Social media, you could think of each post on Facebook as a card. News, media, articles, e-commerce products. So cards are pretty useful. Cards are flexible, extensible. They include optional headers and footers. So we saw the card body, but they have optional headers and footers. Wide variety of content, wide variety of display options. Here's your basic card, your class of card, dealing with margin bottom 3, MB3, right? So MB3, we learned that yesterday, the spacing. Inside of the card then, you've got a card body. Inside the card body, you could just have card text. So very similar. What's on that slide is even more basic than what we have. We've got class of card, then we've got an image, then we've got the card body, heading and paragraph and anchors. By the way, you can use button classes to style your anchor tags. Right? Yesterday I had a outer button and an inner anchor tag, but you can just style your anchors, style your links as buttons by adding the class of BTN, BTN success, BTN large, so on and so forth. Yes?
So, I don't know. Doesn't the gutter be, when you put the gutter in, maybe in a row?
The gutter. So what did the gutter do? The gutter increased the spacing between each one of these columns.
Right.
So the gutter is the spacing between the columns.
So I was trying to, like, do the same thing you're doing, how it can come out like this. Okay.
I'll take a look. It's kind of hard to see because what we're talking about on the gutter is that you see the green on my screen? There's green on the right of that one, and there's green on the left of that one, and it's increasing both of them just a little bit. The size of that green on both of them just a little. So it's kind of hard to see when you're inspecting because you're only increasing the gutter size a little bit. But that's all the gutter is. But if it's not working, we can take a look. You can kind of see here, you could give cards titles. Now, why are titles important? Titles are important for accessibility purposes. And so you kind of see here, remember to use the appropriate semantic headings. Use headings for structure, not styling. And so we have the tendency to, if we just want something to be big, to put it in a heading. But that's not the semantic way to use it. Keep in mind, we want to kind of structure our HTML documents. In theory, the most important content goes up at the top, and you should be able to basically kind of have an outline. And the headings should be used as almost sections of important content in your outline. And so if there would be an important section that you could click on an outline and take you to that section, that's kind of the semantic way of using headings. So rule of thumb, use headings for structure, not style. Titles are there for screen readers and for accessibility. Explaining the content to someone who can't see the content. Like a screen reader. In this case, we could consider putting the title and the subtitle inside of a header instead. And so here's our div class of card. Then, as you would imagine, the header goes on top of the body. Footer would go beneath the body, just as you would imagine. So the classes that are involved: card header, card text, and card footer. And these are your three child elements. They're all inside of divs, inside of a div with the class of card. It's kind of hard to see, but it does style them with kind of a alternating row color. And so if you look kind of close, you got this gray, then it goes white, then it goes gray again. So there are some default styles for your cards. When you have these headers and footers, that is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What if you wanted to make the like where the text is on the card, like if you wanted to make that like a darker color, darker background color on it? Where would you
Yes,
put that?
I would put that on the card body.
Okay.
So we learned those background colors there yesterday.
You do
The BG hyphen.
dark, I guess.
Uh-huh. So let's do that real quick. So the question was, let's put a background color on this card text. And so yesterday we talked about, actually I'll just search for background color. And these are the built-in ones. Maybe BG dark. So class of BG hyphen dark. So on the card body, BG dark. There you go. And then let's just say we want to do the text color of white, of course. Text color, or we would say font color, or would we just search for color? So there are theme colors. These are classes for text that are built in. Text of light, right? Text light.
Okay.
Go back to this.
It's so easy.
Yeah. Again, or you could use the built-in classes, or as we learned how to change our own, writing custom CSS. Yeah.
So that was my question, what if you wanted to make that like color our own color?
Yeah, you could, instead of text light,
You just make an ID, right?
yeah, give it an ID of change. So combination of either using the built-in Bootstrap stuff or customizing it with our own. Good questions.
One more question.
Yeah.
If we wanted to use our own CSS, I know you used it just in the like the head.
The embedded, yep.
Yeah, embedded.
You could do external, but what you do is you link to the Bootstrap CSS first, and then yours underneath it, right?
So would it still be better to use external?
Yes, it's always, external is always preferred. There are some Bootstrap classes that can allow you to change the text alignment. I think we covered those yesterday. There's text centered, there's right align, there's left align. Again, the Bootstrap docs are your friend, your best friend during this period in time. Just get real familiar with how to search, text alignment, text start, text center, text end. So let's throw a class of text end on this. So it makes it right aligned, centered, or left aligned. Oh, jumped ahead. Background colors. Images on top of the card, we demonstrated that. This is an example of image on bottom. So we've got the card body. Notice the images are not in the card body. They're either above the card body or below the card body. Images on left. You'll notice the images on left, they did a background image. So what do we have here? We have a card. Inside of the card, we've got a row. The row has two columns, 1/3 and 2/3. And they give it a minimum height. Now, could you just use an image tag in here? Yeah, you probably could have just used an image tag. You don't have to do a background image like this slide shows, but this is the shorthand for the background. Remember, it gives you the URL, the positioning, and allows you to set a minimum height, because if you don't set a minimum height on a background image, there's no room for it to show up. So you got to set the height so that there's content area for a background image to show up. Images on right, well, it's literally just putting it, well, there's a couple ways. This slide has you change the order, which is a Flexbox feature. This is a Flexbox class. You could change the order, or you could just change the dimensions of your columns. Okay, didn't need to hit that too heavily, because I think once you get the swing of Bootstrap, adding classes, seeing how they work, now it's just kind of doing a dive on these different components. Go ahead and stop the recording here.